The first thing she said to me wasn't her name. "No one wants to date me." It came out flat, practiced, like a sentence she'd rehearsed so many times it no longer hurt to say, but her eyes betrayed her. They were tired eyes, the kind that had learned to brace before every conversation, every introduction, every hopeful beginning that ended the same way. We were sitting in a quiet corner of a neighborhood cafe in Ohio, the kind with chipped mugs and a chalkboard menu that never changed. I had met her only 15 minutes earlier through a mutual friend who thought we'd at least have something to talk about. I expected awkward small talk. I didn't expect a confession that heavy, that fast. I smiled gently, not knowing what else to do. "That's a rough way to start a coffee," I said. She let out a short laugh. "I like to save time." Her name was Emily. She worked as a pediatric physical therapist, loved thrift store novels, and apologized too much, like someone who had learned to shrink herself to make others comfortable. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, fingers pressing into one another as if holding herself together. I asked carefully, "Why do you think that?" She stared at the table for a long moment. Then she looked up at me, something resolved settling in her expression. "Because sooner or later," she said, "this happens." And then, with hands that trembled just slightly, she lifted her shirt. Not all the way, just enough. I didn't gasp. I didn't look away. I didn't say anything at first, because what I saw wasn't shocking in the way movies teach us to react. It was shocking in a quieter, deeper way. Scars. A long one running across her abdomen, another climbing up her side. Smaller ones, faded but unmistakable, like a map of battles fought inside her own body. She dropped her shirt quickly, shame rushing in as if she'd exposed something unforgivable. "I know I shouldn't do that," she said, voice tight, "but it's easier than waiting for someone to walk away later. They always do." I felt something crack open in my chest, not pity, not discomfort, but anger, not at her, at the world that taught her this moment would end badly. "What happened?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then sighed. "Cancer, twice. First at 16, then again at 23. They took parts of me out to save the rest." She forced a smile. "Which is great. I'm alive, I know that. But alive doesn't always mean wanted." I thought about all the people I knew who complained about dating apps, about ghosting, about chemistry not clicking, and here was someone who had stared down death before she was old enough to rent a car, apologizing for surviving in a body that bore proof of it. "Every time I think someone might actually like me," she continued, "there's a moment coming, the moment where I have to explain, where I have to undress in more ways than one, and that's usually where it ends." She looked at me, bracing again, waiting. I didn't plan my response. It came from somewhere deeper than thought. "I'm not going anywhere." She blinked. "You don't have to say that." "I know. I mean it anyway." Her eyes searched my face, suspicious, like someone who'd heard comforting words before and learned not to trust them. She said, "Most people say that, at first. Well, most people aren't me." She laughed then, really laughed. It surprised both of us. We talked for hours that day, about her patients, about my job as a high school history teacher, about how unfair it felt that kids had to learn about wars before they learned how to be kind. She told me about the nights she spent in hospital rooms, watching the ceiling tiles, promising herself she'd live a life that mattered if she made it out. When we finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Just so you know," she said, "you're allowed to change your mind later." "I know," I replied, "but I don't think I will." Dating Emily wasn't a montage of perfect moments. It was real life, messy and tender, and sometimes heavy. There were days when her body ached for no visible reason, days when a routine checkup sent her spiraling into silence, nights when she woke up from dreams where doctors spoke in hushed voices again. And there were moments that tested me, too, not because of her scars, but because loving someone who had almost been lost felt like everything felt fragile. I had to confront my own fear of attachment, of loss, of not being strong enough if the worst ever came back. One evening, months in, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, frozen. I watched from the doorway as she traced one of her scars with her finger. "I hate this part," she whispered. I stepped behind her, careful, giving her space. "Which part?" "Letting someone see me when I don't feel complete." I met her eyes in the mirror. "Emily, you're the bravest person I know. Those scars didn't take anything away from you. They prove you fought." Tears spilled over then, the quiet kind that come when someone finally says the thing you've needed to hear your whole life. "Why doesn't that scare you?" she asked. "It does," I admitted, "but not in the way you think. It scares me how close I came to never knowing you." The real test came a year later. A routine scan turned into a phone call turned into a doctor's appointment that lasted too long. I sat beside her in that cold room, holding her hand so tightly my knuckles hurt. When the doctor finally spoke, it wasn't the news we feared, but it wasn't simple either. There would be monitoring, more tests, uncertainty. In the car afterwards, Emily broke down completely. "I can't do this to you," she sobbed. "I can't ask you to stay through this again." I pulled over, turned to her, and said the words I'd said on our first day, but this time they carried the weight of everything we'd been through. "I'm not going anywhere." She shook her head. "You don't know what you're promising." "Yes," I said, "I do." Years passed. Life unfolded the way it does, unexpectedly. Emily's health stabilized. I proposed on a rainy afternoon in the same cafe where we'd first met. She said yes through tears and laughter, hands shaking the same way they had that day, but this time not from fear. On our wedding night, as she stood in front of me, scars visible, vulnerable, she whispered, "Thank you for seeing all of me." I kissed her forehead. There was never anything to overlook. Today, when she tells our story, she sometimes starts the same way she did with me. "No one wanted to date me." And then she smiles, looks at me, and adds, "Turns out I only needed one person who stayed." Because humanity isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other, again and again, especially when it's hard. And love? Love isn't about the absence of scars. It's about the courage to say, even when the world teaches you to run, "I'm not going anywhere."